to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap, and we're going to start off with the WBA mandated title defense of Vasyl Lomachenko's WBA title against Anthony Crolla. You know, when the fight was announced, I didn't make any bones about it. It's not an intriguing matchup, but what it is a necessary evil, or at least what it was. It being that this wasn't the original plan. The original plan was a unification fight with the winner of Chaniev versus Comey. Comey won the fight, Comey got injured, so there goes your unification fight. Wow. The only other champion at the weight was Mikey Garcia, and we know that that's a fight that Vasyl Lomachenko wants and has wanted. But the problem there is Mikey Garcia decided to masquerade as a welterweight. That didn't work out. So, with those two doors being temporarily closed, that didn't leave Vasyl Lomachenko very many options in terms of a quality fight to make. And what it did do is open a door for the WBA to order him to defend his title against Anthony Crolla. Anthony Crolla, who was his mandatory challenger. For those of you out there that don't understand what that means, because believe it or not, there are people out there that frequent these channels and don't know what a mandatory challenger is or how that works. But the way it breaks down, if Vasyl Lomachenko would have chosen to have any other fight aside from a fight with Anthony Crolla, what would have happened is he would have been stripped of his WBA title. And for a guy who's looking to become an undisputed champion, and has been for some time now, for a guy who's looking to become an undisputed champion, that wouldn't make any kind of fucking sense. Why would you vacate your title or allow your title to be stripped?
I'm not fighting Crolla.
To avoid fighting a guy you know you can beat, a guy you can easily beat, as was displayed on Saturday night. I'll be honest that the performance didn't blow my socks off. It didn't tell me anything that I didn't already know. That Vasyl Lomachenko is such a nuanced fighter, a fighter who graces most credible pound-for-pound lists, in the top 5, I might add. The performance itself didn't blow my socks off because there was nothing that I didn't already know. I already know that Vasyl Lomachenko is levels above a fighter like Anthony Crolla.
I already knew that.
I already know that Anthony Crolla stands little to no chance of making this competitive, much less winning the fight. These are all things that ahead of the fight, I already know. So when I see them play out the way I thought they were going to play out, I'm not the least bit surprised, I'm not the least bit blown away, because I already know that Vasyl Lomachenko is such a nuanced, unique, and special fighter that even a guy like Anthony Crolla stands little to no chance of winning. But unlike some others, I'm not going to be critical of Vasyl Lomachenko because of Anthony Crolla's shortcomings.
Why would I?
I think what gets lost in the sauce here is that the people that are watching a fight, the average guy watching a fight, doesn't do all the legwork that me and you might do. You know, me and you that either upload videos to YouTube regarding the sport of boxing or watch videos on YouTube regarding the sport of boxing. I think what gets lost in the sauce to the casual fan is that Anthony Crolla is, in fact, a top 10, a division-by-division top 10 lightweight. You understand? We're not just talking about some guy that graces the WBA's top 10 or something like that. No, not just the WBA's. Anthony Crolla is, in fact, ranked as a top 10 lightweight across the board in the division-by-division rankings. The rankings that rate all of these guys against each other. You will find the name of Anthony Crolla. But Vasyl Lomachenko, being who he is, the special fighter that he is, even a guy who graces the top 10 can go in there with him and look like he never boxed a day in his life. Because that's the kind of fighter that Vasyl Lomachenko is. So there's nothing to be critical about. At the end of the day, all Vasyl Lomachenko is doing in this situation is satisfying his obligations as a champion. And him making short work of a guy who's ranked in the top 10 the way that he did, limited, not limited, subject to your opinion, or not subject to your opinion, the fact of the matter is that Anthony Crolla is ranked as a divisional top 10 fighter in both transnational, BoxRec, what have you, okay? It's not my opinion that his name is there. It's not subject to my opinion, his name being there. The same way it's not subject to your opinion, his name being there. At minimum, what I'll say is that Friday night's performance against Anthony Crolla was little more than an iteration or reiteration of what I already knew. That Vasyl Lomachenko is such a good fighter that you can match him against most of the guys in the weight class, and most of those guys stand little to no chance. And it's not that it reflects poorly on those guys so much as it reflects well on him, because that's how good he is. This is not some guy from 130 that they brought up to 135 to make Vasil Lomachenko look good.
Nope.
This is not some guy that they conjured up after 2 years of inactivity, decided to give him a title shot to make Vasil Lomachenko look good. No, this is a guy who's ranked within the top 10 of the same weight class that Vasil Lomachenko campaigns in. It's just that Vasil's a good fighter. He's a very good fighter. He's a pound-for-pound fighter, and he is nuanced in such a way that most other fighters are not. Even guys that grace the top 10 rankings of the division-by-division rankings in a weight class. I mean, that's really the difference between, being a good, solid fighter and being considered a pound-for-pound fighter. The subtleties, the nuances, the uniqueness of a fighter, what attributes he has, what skill set he displays. Those are the differences. That's not saying that every fighter who's not a pound-for-pound fighter or isn't considered a pound-for-pound fighter. That's not saying that any fighter not on a pound-for-pound list is shit. No, you got plenty of good fighters out there. Good, solid fighters. Some have several losses, some have none. But the difference between those good, solid fighters and those pound-for-pound fighters are the differences you might see between a guy like Lomachenko and a guy like Anthony Crolla. It's just a different conversation when you're looking at a fighter that is as nuanced as this fighter is nuanced. So I reiterate, my assessment of Vasil Lomachenko's performance is it was just a reiteration of what I already knew. And I don't fault him for it because it's not like he had much of a choice anyway. It's either you fight Anthony Crolla or you forfeit your belt to him. Now, why the fuck would you want to do that when you know you can beat him and we know you can beat him? You understand? There's nothing to be critical about. The most I can gather is that if you ever come across any harsh critics in regards to that fight, any guys who want to, downplay the performance, disparage Vasil Lomachenko for one reason or another.
It's always something.
If you ever come across some of those guys, what you've got to realize is on this channel, we try to give every fighter that we talk about on this channel a fair and even assessment. A fair and even assessment based on the facts. Whereas what you find with some others is they're not looking to give you a fair and even assessment of a fighter. What they're looking to do is cater to their own preferences and pander to their subscribers. So they're going to disparage fighters that they feel their subscribers don't like or fighters that they don't like. And they're not looking to make sense or be fair and give you a fair and even assessment. They're not looking to do that. So it all depends on what you, the listener, want to be subject to. If you're looking for a fair and even assessment of fighters, then you're in the right place. But if you're looking for anything other than that, I suggest you go elsewhere. And now we move on to some of Saturday night's action. On Saturday night, a fight that might have flown a bit low on the radar was the WBO title fight between WBO champion Areli Muciño and contender, strong punching contender, Yarineth Altuve. This fight took place on the undercard for the Jaime Munguia versus Dennis Hogan WBO title fight. And let me tell you, this is a fight where both fighters, if you know anything about their reputations, this is a fight where both combatants lived up to their reputations. Little known fact, Areli Muciño is known by the moniker of the machine gun, La Ametralladora. And with good reason, because that's how she fights, like a machine gun. Non-stop punching, non-stop action, non-stop pressure. And her opponent, Yarineth Altuve, has developed a reputation as a very dangerous puncher in the weight class, it being that every single fight she's ever won was won by way of knockout. She's got 10 professional victories and 10 professional knockouts. But she's not just a strong puncher. She shows good form, good movement. So the battle between the two, the clash of these two combatants, yielded a lot of entertainment value. Rest assured that this is the kind of fight that could actually draw in a casual audience because these aren't chess players. These are not finesse fighters. These are fighters that come to bang. And that's what you saw from the opening bell. Now in this contest, every single round, regardless of who the judges might have scored it for, every single round was a competitive round where both fighters are showing their quality, showing their shit. Areli Muciño and her come-forwardness, her aggression, her volume punching, her sweeping hooks, looping rights,
all that shit,
body punching, it was all put on display, and what really won Areli Muciño this fight was two things in particular that stand out most of all. One of those things being consistency. That throughout this fight, regardless of what's happening, Areli Muciño was consistently the aggressor. That more often than not, she's the one coming forward, she's the one throwing punches, combinations, she's the one forcing the other fighter back, forcing the other fighter to give up real estate. Consistently throughout the fight, more often than not, what you saw was that Arely Muciño made a commitment to being the aggressor, made a commitment to bringing the action. Now at times, she paid for it. At times, Yarineth Altuve landed some devastating shots. And that's the price that aggressive fighters like Arely Muciño often pay for being so aggressive, that as you're coming forward and opening up to land combinations, there's always a chance that in the heat of the battle, in the heat of the exchange, a nasty punch might get through. And we saw that a couple of times in this fight. In one of the later rounds, in the closing seconds of that round, towards the end of the fight, Yarineth Altuve landed a very devastating shot on Arely Muciño, a shot that quite visibly had her on shaky legs. And I'll tell you that if these were 3-minute rounds instead of 2-minute rounds, because in women's boxing, the rounds are 2 minutes. In men's boxing, they're 3 minutes. If this had been a 3-minute round, it's highly probable that Arely wouldn't have made it out of that round. She stumbled back to her corner, and in many ways, she was saved by the bell. There were moments like this in the fight where, Arely, her aggression, she was getting the job done, but there were moments where she was really paying for it because Yarineth Altuve is a devastating puncher. You understand? If you insist on standing in front of this girl, you better have the punch resistance to do that. But it just so happens that Arely Muciño is adept to that task. Because that brings me to the second thing that I think helped Arely win this fight. The fact that she can take a great punch. Arely isn't the kind of fighter that just dishes it out but can't take it. She can take it. And if it wasn't for that, this fight might have had a very, very different outcome. Ahead of the Nicola Adams-Arely Muciño fight, the fight that ended up not happening because Adams ended up getting injured, ahead of that fight, in my preliminary thoughts video, I talked about how, there's not a lot of nuances to Arely Muciño's game plan. It's a straightforward kind of game plan. But just because it's easy to understand doesn't mean it's easy to work around. It takes a lot of poise, a lot of composure to go the distance with a fighter that is going to be walking you down or trying to, throwing punches at you and pressuring you and forcing you back. It takes a lot of composure, a lot of poise to deal with a fighter like that the full course of the fight. And that even though Nicola Adams has a great amateur background, Olympic standout turned professional, even though she has all of those things, what she doesn't have is a lot of professional experience. Professional experience in the sense that as you develop as a fighter, fight by fight, you gain more poise, more control, a sense of calm. You're not a slave to the moment, thus, you're not sucked into wars whenever a pressure-style fighter wants to suck you into a war. And that's what made that contest intriguing. I still wonder right now if that's a fight that we're going to see next or somewhere down the line. Because the deal with a fighter like Arely Muciño, a pressure-style fighter that is a volume puncher that wants to work mid-range to inside and land anything from headshots to body shots, because she switches it up. Ahead of a fight with someone like that who's looking to pressure you and overwhelm you, you're going to need to be able to maintain composure. You're going to need to be composed throughout the duration of the fight, because if you get sucked into a war, you're playing right into her hands and giving her what she wants. And for a fighter who doesn't have a lot of professional experience, that's conceivable. That's something that could happen because that's something that did happen to Natasha Jonas when she squared off against Vivian Obanov. That's what makes the Adams versus Muciño fight so intriguing, And that's why I'm still waiting to see if that fight is going to come into fruition. So, the most I can say about Arely Muciño's performance is you have to realize that not everybody's a finesse fighter. Not everybody's a chess player. Some fighters have a more straightforward approach, but the level at which they operate can still be at the elite level, because quite honestly, in order for you to even be able to contend with a pressure style fighter like this, you'd have to be at the elite level yourself. Otherwise, you're either going to get beat and or run over. But just because a fighter's style and their approach is easy to understand, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to work around. You're going to need certain ingredients yourself, certain elite level qualities and nuances of your own to be able to deal with that kind of pressure. So my hat goes off to Arely Muciño in what was a successful defense of her WBO title, action-packed fight. For those that didn't see it, you can go on DAZN and watch the goddamn thing to see what I'm talking about. It's not a fight that disappoints. It's an action-packed fight with, I reiterate, sweeping hooks, looping rights, body punching, and all action. So if you want to take stock of what I'm talking about, go over to DAZN and watch that fight. But for now, good fight from Muciño. I was entertained from round 1 to round 10. And one fight that took place this weekend, among the many fights that took place this weekend, and there really is a lot to cover. This is far from all of it. There's more to come. But along with the fights that took place this weekend, Zurdo Ramirez, WBO super middleweight champion Zurdo Ramirez, made his light heavyweight debut against Karpency. Seasoned guy who's been around the block, guy who's been in there with some of the best the divisions had to offer. And it was an intriguing performance, rather curious I should say. You see, Zurdo looked like he belonged in there.
At light heavyweight.
Rather, he looked like he was in the right place as a light heavyweight, given his physical dimensions, his rehydration weight. The guy weighed in at 196 pounds the night of the fight. So you don't really need to wonder if light heavyweight is a more comfortable division than super middleweight comparatively. It's clear that for Zurdo Ramirez, he might feel more comfortable as a light heavyweight.
Let me tell you something.
But upon viewing the performance, viewing how Zurdo looked out there and what he was doing, his combination punching, his aggressiveness, his come forwardness, all that jazz. Viewing this against Karpency, who he stopped. You know, he managed to make the guy say, no mas. I don't want to go out there for another round. Kudos. Viewing that, I thought to myself, you know, Zurdo strikes me as a bit of a greedy puncher. And when I say greedy, I mean that this is a guy who may be stringing one too many punches together depending on who's in the ring with him. Oh, you might be able to get away with that at super middleweight. You know, you might be able to get away with that against super middleweights. But against light heavyweights, the light of Artur Beterbiev, the likes of Dmitry Bivol, Sergey Kovalev, even an Eleider Alvarez, if you were as greedy with them as you were with Karpency, I doubt that Zurdo would get away with it. The impression that I was left with while I watched Zurdo Ramirez in his light heavyweight debut against Karpency, who he was working. You know, he was opening up on that guy, landing combinations upstairs and downstairs. As I watched this, the thought that stood with me the most was, you know, you can do that to Karpency in your light heavyweight debut, but I can't see you doing that to an Artur Beterbiev and getting away with it. And as far as Karpency, you know, Karpency has nowhere near the maneuvering capabilities of a Dmitry Bivol or a Sergey Kovalev, nowhere near the punch of those guys either. So even though Zurdo's looking good in his light heavyweight debut, there does appear to be more to the story, or at least there should be, because you beating that guy, even in the fashion that you beat that guy, does not indicate to me that you can compete at the elite level as a light heavyweight. And where Zurdo Ramirez will fight next is an open book. We know that there are talks of a potential unification fight at 168 pounds between him and Callum Smith.
And that's the way to go.
But you know, Zurdo might look at this performance at light heavyweight and how comfortable and strong he felt, and he might say, you know, I'm going to stay up here. You know, I like it up here. I feel strong up here. I broke that guy's ribs. He might have a false sense of security because in his light heavyweight debut, he faced a guy who, you know, couldn't do much about him. But in closing, I'll say that, you know, the light heavyweight division is a very dangerous weight class to be in, and it has a lot more to offer in terms of danger than just Karpency. And that maybe Zurdo Ramirez should see about finishing up all his business in the super middleweight division before he decides to continue as a light heavyweight, because nothing he did this weekend indicates to me that he's ready for the elite level light heavyweights that are up there.